My name is Jacqueline Friedman. I'm the founder and executive director of EducateUS. EducateUS is a 501c4 nonprofit working to build an unstoppable movement for sex ed around the country. We work with school board candidates. If you know of any school board candidates, or if you are a school board candidate who's going to be a pro-sex ed candidate once elected, send them our way. We would love to help get them elected. We also work with sitting school board members. We work with folks who just want to advocate for sex ed in their own community. We basically want to do whatever it takes to power up the movement for sex ed around the country. And so if you're doing that work and we can help you do that work in some way, that's what we want to do. We're really glad to have connected with you here tonight. And we can't wait for you to hear the incredible presentation that Britt has and also get into, these are always such exciting conversations. So you are at No Means No with a KNOW. This is our monthly series of learning sessions about things that we all need to understand better in order to be better sex ed advocates. And the topics range from tactics to deep dives into particular issues. And as we previously said, you can check out our YouTube channel. Please subscribe while you're there and see all the previous No Means No events. We've had some really spectacular conversations this year. Our August session is going to be a check-in 6+ months after the start of the Trump administration of what the attacks on sex ed are looking like for real. We had a lot of ideas about what it might look like. We're going to do an assessment of what has actually happened, what we're seeing coming down the pike, and what we can collaborate on together to do about it. So it's going to be an absolute can't miss. That said, I don't have a date for you yet. So definitely read your email when we send around the video for this. Hopefully we'll have a date set by then. We will definitely be announcing that very soon. But tonight we are here to talk about the radicalization of young women and where is it happening that we're not seeing it and what can we do about it? I have to tell you, when I heard Britt Bischoff, who is our presenter tonight, talk about this in a group that I'm in, I thought I was pretty savvy about this stuff, and the stuff she had to say lit my hair on fire. And I was like, you all need to know about this too right away. And that is why we're here tonight. I'm actually going to turn it over to Britt. If you all have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We will not see them if you put them in the chat, but if you put them in the Q&A, we will keep track of them and address them when Britt's done with the formal part of her conversation. So you don't have to hold them to the end. Feel free to start popping those questions in whenever you have them. So Britt, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, and thanks everyone for having me. I am so honored to be here. My name is Britt, and I'm an intervention strategist and researcher, and I study the influence online, and I build basically systems and strategies to help protect truth. So for the last several years, my work has been confronting disinformation that's designed to divide, manipulate, erase, and then to help fill in those holes and to counter with some effective strategies. And I've worked with campaigns and organizations across the country to fight back against digital attacks to our democracy, on gender justice and abortion rights. And that work led me to some of my current research into how extremists are targeting young women online and how they're seeding belief systems and weaponizing these digital environments. And it's work that I'm proud to do in collaboration with organizations like Ultraviolet to counter disinformation on these gendered narratives, and as a member of the Women's Disinfo Defense Project. So we're facing some really incredible challenges. The current administration's rollback of digital protections, rights, the erasure of women and data from the government, government websites, government data, this has all made this work more difficult and more urgent than really ever before. And just a little bit about my work, because my particular brand of research dives into the mechanics of the environments, and really with the intention to help diagnose and provide strategies to assess these threats and to be effective in those strategies. So today we're going to go beyond the headlines of Tradwives and go a little bit deeper into some of these more strategic, maybe hidden mechanisms behind the pipeline. And then we're going to look at things like how and why, and often things that go unaddressed. So my goal is really to equip you with more nuanced understanding of the landscape and to have a really good conversation to collectively think about more effective counter strategies. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat a little bit later. So if anybody wants to get involved or continue the conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out. So let's first set the stage, and then let's have a candid discussion. Here, I'm going to share my screen. You can see, right? Cool. All right, so let's preface these findings by just acknowledging the incredible power and the influence that Gen Z women have. So they are a significant and growing demographic with strong progressive leanings, actually leaning more and more progressive since 2000. So they're consistently supporting issues like reproductive rights, healthcare, gender equality, climate change. So they're pretty critical. And the right's efforts to target them in this right-wing pipeline is a strategic response to that power. They're really aiming to fracture and to weaken their influence, to reassert patriarchal control, to normalize a lot of these anti-feminist ideologies and exploit existing societal anxieties. And there's a real deliberate attempt to erase and remove the stories of women, of Black and Brown people, LGBTQ+, and trans individuals from public discussion in digital spaces. So these attacks on feminism and the weaponization of the male loneliness epidemic, which I know you talked about, I think several weeks ago, that is surfacing and some disinformation and narratives by blaming progressive movements and feminism in young women as part of this backdrop. So let's talk a little bit more about Gen Z women, and we won't spend too long on this, but how they spend their time online, what makes them vulnerable. I have actually, this floored me, the fact that Gen Z women are the most, they're digital natives. And while they are digital natives, they're surprisingly vulnerable to misinformation, yet they trust themselves in being able to identify information. And it's not necessarily their fault. There are entire ecosystems that are engineered to exploit and to, I don't want to say trick, but that's essentially it, to exploit those vulnerabilities and to deceive when they're doing their media literacy. So most of their content consumption and their information is coming from social. So from TikTok, from YouTube, Instagram, that's the social trifecta for Gen Z. And a lot of this also breeds additional vulnerabilities. I apologize, that's my dog. She's having a blast back there. There's additional vulnerabilities that's created based on how they're consuming content and the instant expectations to really receive answers. So zero-click environments on search is one way. Your attention spans are about 8 seconds, so they expect answers instantly. And that also makes them more vulnerable to really creating more of like the superficial information processing, making them even more susceptible and vulnerable to those biased and manipulated narratives. They're also very susceptible to confirmation bias. So when they see something and they believe it to be true, they go out and they seek, this is validation seeking essentially in search behavior, whether it's on TikTok, YouTube, or on Google or elsewhere. There's also several anxieties that are cultural and socially that are being exploited that also exacerbates the vulnerability that Gen Z is feeling, and that kind of tease up this misinformation belief and susceptibility. And there's also, again, like I said, this growing gender divide between within Gen Z between the male loneliness epidemic and Gen Z women, and various narratives that are also being spun to these different audiences. I'm gonna try to move kind of fast because I've got a lot of information. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we can circle around. I do want to show you some of the narratives that are, I know this is really small, and if you want, I can send you this afterwards so you can see.
Could you? I don't know that I can read that.
Oh, yeah, I definitely will.
Okay, great.
This is a collection of the top maybe 12 narratives that are circulating for Gen Z women right now. And I'm going to tell you that none of this is new. This is all recycled and laundered. We've seen these elsewhere, and where we've seen them is in the manosphere. We've seen them in Christian nationalism, traditionalist religious right, alt-right, white nationalism. These are all just softer ways to say it. And that's exactly what narrative laundering is. So at its core, this pipeline is deeply connected to anti-feminist, conservative, and those alt-right white supremacist movements. And this really promotes the belief that a woman's primary purpose is to serve her husband and her family, and to reject a woman's financial and bodily autonomy, and to promote a more rigid, structured, patriarchal society, social order where women can be controlled. And if these ideas were just presented at face value as they are in the manosphere, they would be flat out rejected, which is why they have to dress them up initially to make them more palatable. So narrative laundering is the process where harmful and radical ideologies are subtly packaged with appealing and seemingly benign, seemingly credible content. So think lifestyle or wellness. It makes them appear harmless and desirable, even empowering. And this is what helps gain mainstream acceptance and an appearance of credibility. Let's look at an example. So some examples of how narrative laundering is actually occurring with these narratives is through the Trump executive orders. This one is talking about the undermining of DEI initiatives, meritocracy orders, versus the ED magazine. This is they call it the conservative Cosmo. I don't know. It's engineered for Gen Z and millennial women. And the entire point is to basically soften these alt-right narratives, recycling and laundering to make them more palatable, and to target women to kind of lure them into their pipeline. So they use more of a mainstream magazine aesthetic, fashion, beauty, celebrity narratives, but they publish more anti-feminist, anti-vaccine, transphobic content, and they make the reactionary views seem, I don't want to say sophisticated because that's, but they make it seem more legitimate. So there are other right-wing influencers, and they also use these, highly curated, romanticized visuals. Oh, before I move on, I want to show you here. This is official Department of Labor data, and this is an example of manipulated content that was edited in April of 2025. This is from 2023 data that supports narratives from ED Magazine, The Conservator, and then other right-wing content that supports the narrative of women outperforming men, or women, or the need, or that the US doesn't need feminism any longer, or that women are doing, or that there isn't a need for DEI, things like that. That is the ultimate narrative frame that they're trying to get at, is that we don't need feminism goes too far, that kind of stuff. So this was published, and it does support these various publications and network of influencers. But back to other right-wing influencers, you might have seen this on TikTok, and how a lot of creators are using things like soft feminine, artisanal sourdough bread, outfits, cottagecore, really romanticized visuals. That's kind of the aesthetic to help, reel in young women, create this sense of simplicity, nostalgia, offer some soothing, aspirational imagery, and use that as the primary vehicle for the message. Another tactics that they're using is,
there's a question about whether or not you're advancing your slides, because we're only seeing the same slide.
Are you seeing the pipeline?
Yes, now we are.
Good. Okay.
Okay.
We'll get to all of this. Part of what they're doing is co-opting our language, our feminist language, progressive language, Some of it is to confuse, some of it's for targeting purposes. There's also the information fact check warfare that we've seen in other examples where, when you go to, verify something, there's essentially a battle that's happening in search results to prove who's right. And the point is to confuse and to inundate. We don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but the co-opting of progressive language is a significant tactic that is deployed in this strategy. Then there's some examples would be how they're co-opting choice feminism, and women's empowerment, women's rights. Then there's the red pill for women. So they present as uncovering a hidden truth, secret to happiness, that the mainstream culture hides. So really making mainstream culture, mainstream media, institutions sort of a villain, driving wedges into institutional trust. So this is often portrayed as a form of empowerment through rejecting modern narratives and to sell the idea of nostalgia. Again, this isn't new. That's what MAGA is. And essentially just to reject mainstream institutions. Let's talk more about the funnel. So it's a gradual radicalization process. So it is often described as a funnel. And this is what makes the traditionalist and alt-right ideologies palatable young women, as we discussed previously. And it moves people essentially from a broad stage, attracting by interest and emotion, all the way down to, your core ideology. And it's not linear. So I apologize if this is a little bit deceiving, but it's not meant to be linear. This is just the stages that it happens. So you can continue to loop around as many times as you need, engage, and search. There are a lot of factors that go into this, into how people are pushed from one stage to the next, but it does gradually happen, and it happens over time. And it's important to note that, just because it does involve so many factors, and it's not a direct cause or a cause and effect of any single interest. So this is a look at what's trending right now for Gen Z, but really what is trending right now that is somewhat vulnerable to the right-wing pipeline. And I mean that in the sense of emotion and the interest intent that we reveal to these algorithms as we're going along. So the first stage is the aesthetic funnel. That's the on-ramp. The whole goal is just to attract wide audiences with apolitical aesthetics, matched intent, information. Think any one of those in the last rung. The ideology is not overt, and it's often hidden, and it's often not directly within the content itself, but it's what happens after and the stages afterward. The second phase is the influencer bridge, and that's where the soft ideology through more relatable figures, more well-known figures in the influencer network, anti-woke commentators. This is where things like the empowerment language is starting to be co-opted, and once engaged, the influencers start to introduce more and more conservative, anti-feminist ideas by blending them with more relatable and mainstream topics. So it's not super in your face right away either. Still, you're still peppering it, you're still hiding it. I don't know if we really need to talk about key actors there. Some of them are in there, but Turning Point USA, Isabel Brown, Pearl Davis. I'm not sure if anybody has heard of those influencers. Daily Wire personalities. I know Brett Cooper has been discussed in headlines as well. The next rung is the publication hub. And this is important because the whole purpose here is to legitimize that worldview, basically solidifying the belief. And this is where things like E! Magazine, Conservator, and then even the White House press releases, like we saw with the narrative laundering from Trump's releases, this is where those step in. So it also mixes things like the more innocuous type of content into the mix. So it's not overt. So when someone's searching for your Victoria's Secret credit card, this is a legit target on the conservator and the website. People who are searching for things like that, they can more easily get in front of and then start training algorithms through, networked connections. And then we'll get to all of that. But algorithmically, they can get in front of people algorithmically and then start to make an impression. So the last rung is the ideological core, and that is the destination. This is where more overt misogynistic, this is more than the overt messaging. It's more of the belief adoption. So this is where the user's been red pilled or fully radicalized, or the laundered narratives connect back to a more solidified belief and acceptance of that belief for the person who's entered that funnel. We're going to move along so that way we have plenty of time for the Q&A. I do want to spend just a second on this slide. This is just an example of the algorithms, and how this is so effective isn't necessarily because of the algorithms itself or the platforms. The algorithms set up the infrastructure for the creators, the marketers, and the people behind the messaging and the targeting to strategically exploit. So everything that you do on TikTok, on Google, whether it's engaging or it's viewing for a certain piece or a certain amount of time, or even your search. So remember, TikTok is a search engine and a social media platform. So it has hyper specific details about you, about your interests, about your emotional state. That makes it easy for marketers and creators and people who are within this pipeline to target you with hyper specificity to know when you need a specific piece of content. This example, I dove into a Gen Z. This was actually trending. So love search or love tarot readings on TikTok, followed by like a post breakup glow, right? The sequence of those searches and the engagements led me in, plus fitness and wellness type of searches and engagement, that all led back to ballerina farms. So I was able to receive ads.
Could you explain a few of the terms on here, like
Sure.
soft life and divine feminine, and also ballerina farms? I don't know. I think some people will know and not everyone will.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with Ballerina Farms. That is Tradwife. So Ballerina Farms has her own TikTok account. She's probably one of the most famous and influential. Her actual name is escaping me. She's very influential on TikTok and in her content. So she has a protein powder now. And people who are who are searching and engaging on fitness talk and searching on gloves and protein recipes, they're receiving messages and ads to buy her protein powder. The thing to know about when you buy something from, especially somebody like Ballerina Farms, is you enter their data universe and they have a lot of power to then continue to target you. And once you're in their system, that's where those echo chambers really start to form and solidify around you. Things like the love tarot reading, I think you said, divine feminine and soft life. So those are trends that are on TikTok right now. Very popular with Gen Z women. Soft life is like soft feminine type of aesthetic. The idea is more of, my niece explained it to me as you don't chase, you attract.
But also the idea is like your goal is to be taken care of and not have to do anything, right? Like, yeah.
And then the divine feminine, that is how it is being targeted and used on Facebook, that stems from spirituality. What it is leading to is more of like the feminine coaching that right-wing influencers and this right-wing pipeline, basically the narrative recycling and narrative laundering there about removing women from their professional careers and becoming more of I don't want to say, feminine aesthetic. So it's a more solidified version of the soft life. I don't know if I explained that very well at all. Anyway, so this was the progression into that algorithmic funnel, and I think it's worth stressing again that everything that you do, so it's hyper targeted. We may have to fast forward through the ED magazine profile. This I just wanted to give you a look at just who they are with their targeting. So they have a range of content that spans from culture, relationships, sex, their pop culture. I think I already said that. Again, they're trying to be the conservative Cosmo, but they do it in a way that's sort of sneaky. So they have a lot of targeting that's for things like quotes. This is like your foot in the door where you're just, you're looking for something empowering, like a Dolly Parton quotes is something that they target pretty hard. And the conservator. And this is your entry piece. If we think about that ring again, that's your entry piece, Dolly Parton quotes. And then once you engage, once you spend time on that site, you're more likely to see that content circle in your feeds again. And that's what makes it pretty dangerous. They're also doing additional type of targeting beyond just search and social, where they're looking at things like that are contextual. So when you're engaging with content across the internet that relates to something that they want to talk, again, emotional exploitation, looking at things in a hyper nuanced sense. Oh geez, I don't want to go over too far, but they're looking at things in a very hyper nuanced sense. That way they can target in those exact moments to get you onto their site, and then you're within their pipeline. Let's move on to, maybe I'll spend 5 more minutes and then we can open it to it doesn't all stay on social. So it really transforms or transcends platform. They're really targeting literally every avenue and platform in our digital behaviors. So even Gen Z, they're using, Google and TikTok kind of simultaneously, but they're using it in a different way. How this is the exposure trigger. So if they come across a piece of like mis or disinformation on TikTok or something that really sparks their curiosity or is a catalyst for more research, like it doesn't sound right, this is the sort of the flow of exposure trigger. So what we're doing is wanting to recognize those digital breadcrumbs cross-platform, and really understanding, what is that exposure trigger? So they started on TikTok, they were exposed to something about, I don't know, let's go back to the soft life, right? So they see something that's not quite right, they search. Their next step is to do their media literacy. They're looking, is this real? What do I need to know about this? This is where they enter the rabbit holes of information, where they're doing their media literacy. So this is the part that I also want to stress, is that this part has actually been co-opted. Very frequently, actually, let's fast forward to this slide so you can see the Google still is a primary gateway for information in general for all demographics. And people very much trust what they see on Google. Sometimes they shouldn't. What they see in the top search results, so when you see those, the AI overviews, rich snippets, people trust those in particular. And again, going back to the attention span of Gen Z, 8 seconds, they're just going to look at that snippet, and then they don't actually take the time to click 60% of those searches and without an additional click. So as they're doing their media literacy, they're doing their fact check, but it's also being co-opted to make it appear legitimate, what they, the disinformation or misinformation or the falsehood that they came into contact with. And it's oftentimes right there on Google. So about a third of search results had mis or disinformation that was within those search results. And users were 20% more likely to believe that false information after they searched. And again, the zero-click environment makes things incredibly difficult. Also, going back to this previous slide here, the belief formation is a pretty crucial step as well. So again, people are very trusting of the content that they see in Google, and now increasingly AI, although there's a little bit more skepticism around AI. So there's a reason why all of these stages in this process of misinformation, disinformation, and our information journey in general is targeted by mis and disinformation to basically validate a specific worldview and a narrative. Oh, didn't realize that was it. I thought I had one more. But if you want, I mean, I've got some like cool stuff if you want to check out the Substack, it's there. I know I cruised through that. There's a lot of information, but I want to make sure that we had time to chat.
Britt, thank you so much. I have a question before we open up to chat, and we definitely have some questions already lined up in the Q&A. But I think that one of the things that I really took away when I heard you speak about this originally is I had been sort of thinking like, young women aren't going to fall for the shit that young men are falling for, right? But I think that what's so important about the work that you've done is you outline how hard it is for them to avoid eventually falling for it, right? Like, because they are actually doing what they think is their due diligence, but where they're going to their due diligence is also co-opted. What do you think that we should be doing?
Yes.
What do you recommend? So there are a lot of people in this Zoom room who have young people in their life, who work with young people, who do incredible advocacy with and for young people. Like, what should we be thinking about in terms of like, how do we outcompete them? Should we be using the same strategies the right's doing, or should we not be using the same strategies the right's doing? Should we be doing other stuff, or both?
Both. I'm a yes and kind of person. And it also very much depends on the situation as well. The first thing that I'll say is that paying attention to or creating content on platforms that you can control and earn media is incredibly important right now. The reason why is our AI systems are all under attack as well. Google and the rollback of all of this content does create data voids that we don't, meaning that we have a lot of holes and a lot of knowledge gaps around these areas. So when people are then searching for it, or they're in a receptive mode for that kind of content, it's not there. So creating the content, always, be the change that you want to see in the world. So creating that content, putting it out there, and then making sure that it's visible. I don't want to stress anybody out, but I do think that it's really important that people know that what is on AI is also heavily being targeted. AI slop is a term I think that people have heard. So there are also some really, really cool strategies that you can do through markup on your site, through like an LLMS.text, and some additional markups and training of AI. So you can kind of fight back in that way, and you can fill some of these voids that are left from the rollback of content and data. And we've seen some of these projects, we've seen some pretty cool and interesting results. I also think that it's important to pay attention to, I'm sorry,
You're doing great.
there's so much that we can actually do.
Yeah.
It's creative. Open source content, user generated content, so people telling their stories, that's one thing that I think is super important. So there's a friend from church who, I can't get this out of my head, but our stories are the most important things. Like, they are so important, especially to the information ecosystem. That's me quoting Bev from church. And that's what I would recommend for everybody is, if you can, and if you're able, share your story and how it directly affects you. What that does, this is the technical piece. So your story will connect to people who are algorithmically relevant to your network, or similar to you, right? So if you throw your content, your story out there, Reddit would be a good place to have it, YouTube Shorts, and contributing to Wikipedia would be fantastic. All of these platforms contribute to the open web. So Google, or the open information ecosystem. So Google, for example, pulls on all that kind of content. It also pulls on, or it surfaces content from social platforms as well. And AI, a lot of those platforms are AI, or in the underlayers of AI training. And when you see content from or about DEI or gender equality and reproductive rights, I want to say it's 40% of that makeup is Wikipedia, Reddit, and then other social platforms. So they're pretty important.
Got it. So I think that it's such a good reminder because a lot of times I think like, why am I going to say again the thing I have said 17,000 times in this Reddit forum or in the, in this forum, but like the saying the same things over and over again is what they're doing. And one of the ways we outcompete them is also not shutting up ourselves, even if we don't feel like it's going to convince anybody, like in this particular forum you're posting in, think about it as feeding the algorithm and the AIs.
Yeah,
That's
what
great.
we're just training AI and the algorithms.
Yeah, let's train them on what we want them to learn.
Exactly.
Okay, there's a ton of questions. I'm
Yeah.
going to start by combining a couple of them in here. Amy is asking, given the massive resources the right is putting into psychological warfare, are progressives doing anything effective to counter it? And then Andre asks, are there examples of moderate, liberal, and progressive content for women that counter these narratives? So I think those are a set of questions.
Sorry, I don't think I.
If you slide down a little, Amy and Andre's questions.
I'm not sure if, to answer Amy's question, I'm not sure if anybody on the left is doing anything equivalent, but I think that's where we take the bull by the horns and we start to produce strategies that are effective. I honestly don't know if a lot of our infrastructure recognizes just how interwoven their entire strategy is, because we don't want to give the right a whole lot of credit, but they are all built from marketing. Like they are a marketing machine, and it's all algorithmic and cross platform. That's kind of what I specialize in, is the behavioral aspect and understanding how people move, and then creating these strategies that are based on behavioral interests, emotional resonance, and things like that. I have hope that we're recognizing that there's a problem and that we can start having better conversations and then doing more effective strategies. There are other groups that I am aware of. I'm sorry, I'll take that back. Other groups that I'm aware of that are doing like really cool experimentation to see like really what's effective in this type of targeting. There's some really interesting and
Can you recommend anything that for folks to go look at? I love the work that we Make the Future is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll send along some resources and some links.
Yeah.
I think that might be a little bit more effective because I can be a little
perfect. Yeah, we'll set it up in the follow-up.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am gonna now move to the sort of more personal level questions, and there's a pair, the first one and the last one. Darcy's asking, how can I convince friends and family on the on-ramp how dangerous it is? And very similar question from Sherry. I have 3 kids, they're all in their 20s, try to talk to them. Grandparent stories hold a lot of weight. I wish I'd talked to them more sooner. What else can I do? So what can we do for the young women in our lives?
You know, I actually think about the video that from And No Means No a couple months ago with your framework, Jacqueline, where you were talking about the conversations and holding space and like and deep canvassing. And I am such a fan of deep canvassing. And if there's a way that we can do that digitally, I'm in. That sounds fun. I would also say that there is more that we need to modernize our media literacy a little bit and to make it reflect the environments that we're in. Really getting at the critical thinking and encouraging our young women to use critical thinking. So prompting what those questions would be to consider source and all of the different factors and who benefits, time, things like that. And then nudging them through media literacy, I think would also be helpful. If you can work those into your conversations, that'd be fantastic. But I think Jacqueline would actually be a better
Well,
You could
thank
probably.
you. That's very flattering. The conversation you're talking about is on our YouTube, which Candace, I think, is going to drop the link to, which is about compassionate conversations. But also we have another training coming up on our deep canvassing script that we talked about in that one, coming up in August. And I think that Candace probably will also be dropping that link shortly if folks want to learn more about how to actually do that piece. I'm also just like such a huge fan of deep canvassing. Um, so
That's
thank
cool.
you. I'm glad that you feel the same way. I
Yeah.
would love to figure out how to make that work digitally. I don't know that that work has been done, but that would
Oh, I
be,
have some ideas.
oh, do you? All right.
I'll send you
If
an
you,
email.
yeah, I would love to talk to you about that, Britt. Maybe we'll have you back to talk about it. Um,
Yeah.
we have, I want to ask this media literacy question, and then there's a couple people who are asking about the sort of racial demographics of this and some of the other demographic questions, but since we were already sort of alluding to this, Megan's question that says, how do we encourage resiliency and resistance to this disinformation in through school? And of course, I will be quick to say, like, the regime is already targeting schools that teach
Mhm.
this kind of resilience. So it may not, it may be harder than ever to teach this in actual schools. We might have to find ways outside of school, but I would love to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah. Well, within schools, I think the educators would know the students better. But I go back to AI, and there's so much that we're learning now about AI, media literacy, and how young adults are engaging with it, how they're trusting with it, or how they're trusting it. Um, and things like looking at the sources of AI, making sure that you're not just taking it at face value. So within the 6 seconds, slowing down, even encouraging, our young women to slow down when they're looking at, search results, or when they're engaging with anything online. Um, and then lateral reading, that's one where that's also somewhat co-opted just because of like the pink slime and things
Yeah.
that are being targeted with disinformation. But I think as much as you possibly can, nudging them through some critical thinking. If anybody wants some resources and a checklist on critical thinking and some things to go through, I have some of those. I could just send them to you. Just
That would be fantastic, Britt. Yeah. Um, and also I feel like we need to be having honest conversations with young people of all genders about the risks of AI. And specifically, I'm talking not about like you'll get popularizing or like any of that, but like there's new research that's starting to come out that shows it really erodes your ability to think for yourself and that it does not bounce back easily, right? That if you rely too much on AI to do your thinking, that part of your brain either doesn't develop or atrophies if it had previously developed. And I don't think a lot of people know that. And I kind of want to shout it for the rooftop all the time, like that. People really need to understand. And I think young women who want to consider themselves smart, right, which is most young people want to consider themselves smart, need to understand that like this is going to undermine your actual ability to have an intellect, to do your own research. Do you think
Mhm.
that is going to hit, or am I just, it just hits with me?
I've seen the same studies, and I know what you're talking about. I think, huh, I don't know if I have additional thoughts on that because I largely agree based on what I've read. I do want to go back to another point though
Yeah,
about
yeah,
educators, parents, and recognizing code words and dog whistles as they're constantly changing, and seeing the mapped narrative laundering in those terms is pretty important. And again, they're constantly changing. Those are something that I also have some really great resources for you as well that I can share. Um, I do think that it's going to take a whole of society approach in terms of countering and outcompeting, and not necessarily in the sense of us doing the same thing as they're doing, but keeping up at least,
yeah.
and really recognizing and leaning into the emotional targeting that they're exploiting. So that way we can be there, we can maybe create some shields around that content. And depending on whether or not somebody has actually been exposed to mis and disinformation or specific narratives, where they're at in the journey, really recognizing what those digital breadcrumbs look like. So if they have
Yeah.
been exposed, are they, vulnerable to exposure? Are they currently reading this content, or is it, are they already in the echo chamber? And each recognizing, where they're at based on language, based on behavior, and the emotions that they're basically signaling to us through uh, digital signposts. I don't know any way to, or any other,
Yeah.
but recognizing what those signs are and then setting up these strategies. One thing that we have been incredibly effective with is the preemption. So when we recognize a vulnerability, so this happens a lot in search and then with things like contextual type of targeting, like ads, while somebody's reading a piece of content that might be, adjacent to the right-wing pipeline, we can set up these prompts to, get them to think. But the preemption is are kind of getting in front of it, so that way you can pre-bunk, inoculate, that let them know that, hey, you might see some stuff, just giving them a little bit of a heads up, but without repeating the
Yes.
information yourself, but then also giving them the facts as well. So when they're in that persuasion mode, when they're actually looking for the information, doing their media literacy and fact check, we've had very successful, I'm sorry I didn't answer this question earlier. My brain was
You're
thinking
doing great.
about all sorts of other organizations. We've had really successful case studies where we've used targeting with search and cross-platform tracking to recognize, again, what those emotional signals are, and behavioral signals and search. So what they want to know, recognizing that intent, and then giving them exactly what they needed. So that way we can basically beat the opposition, and we can get there before they do, and kind of preempt a narrative war and route them out of, harm's way before.
If we stay on top of what they're searching for and make sure that they find what we want them to find.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I think that it's so important. I think a lot of us, and I include myself in this, really have so long relied on the idea that we win the culture war by default. And that so much of this has snuck onto the radar. I just think that becoming intentional and proactive about this is something that we need to be building up so fast, but that we're behind because we've just been like, yeah, we have Hollywood, right? Like we win the culture war, and it's just not how it works anymore.
No. And now the Hollywood narrative is under attack.
Also true. All right, I definitely want to get to these questions about like racial demographics because there have been two of them. Is this approach more successful with and or dominated by white women, or what do you see across racial lines?
Yes. So white women are particularly susceptible to trad wife content in particular, but there are strategies for that are in play to target all sorts of demographics and all audiences. As far as so if we go back to the backdrop on Gen Z, that data in particular, that's pretty universal for Gen Z women in total. And I don't have any additional demographic on any of the studies, if that's also of interest. But
All right. And then I think let's have the last question be this one about having a MAGA father or other patriarchal male elder, and whether that's a factor for vulnerability to this stuff.
oh, I'm maybe I don't understand the question. Is it
For young women who have an elder, this person says specifically a man, I don't know why it would have to be a man, but who have somebody in their lives who's an elder who's MAGA, does that make them more rebellious against that MAGA person, or does that make them more susceptible to propaganda? Do we know that?
I do not have the answer to that question, but I would love to find out.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I love that question. Okay. Do you have any closing thoughts for us? We have a few minutes to wrap up. I'll have some closing thoughts at about 8:25, but what do you wanna, yeah, what do you want us to leave us with?
Yeah, I think I would so this is kind of in my rallying cry, is that it takes all of us, a whole of society approach. This includes civil society, it includes private sector, it includes all of us, grassroots organizations, to stitch our corner of the net for our own communities, in ways that our communities will receive it, and in ways that our communities actually need it. And rather than, a strict copy and paste type of approach, what we're seeing is that when we customize it more for our audiences and specifically for their behavioral and intent, we can get some pretty great results. So yeah, it's going to take all of us to cast a very wide net, and we're also, building the plane while we're flying, but we're also stitching this little net, I guess.
Yeah, I love the idea. You got me re-energized to sort of speak up more online again. I have to admit, like a lot of the time, I'm like, I'm so tired of this discourse, but like,
citizen journalism is incredible, and Substack
yes.
it's amazing. It's amazing for that. If you don't have a Substack, I would highly recommend everybody get a Substack. So that way you can at least document this, document, your story. As all of this content and all of this data is being erased from our public discourse, we need it so we can learn from each other. And also peer-to-peer type content is where Gen Z women are especially trending. And they're also looking for, mentorship, guidance, and connection to other women. So if we can fill that void, the better.
Yeah, I agree. We have a youth advisory board, and I got to tell you, the young people we work with who are 16 to 23, they really need places where they feel okay and that people are listening to them, and that their voices are important and that they can, talk about things that are important to them. They're feeling very overwhelmed. They're feeling very isolated. They're seeing a lot of fucked up things happen on their campuses. And I feel like they're all vulnerable right now. So being a presence in a young person's life, I think cannot be overstated in terms of how important that is. Even if that's the piece you can do, you're definitely doing something. Well, Britt, we couldn't be more grateful for this. This has been incredible. You will be sharing the slides with us, yes, and some resources that we mentioned.
Absolutely.
I will have somebody to go through and flag all the things that you said you would send us so that you don't have to remember.
I appreciate that.
So it will take a couple of days for us to get this out, but we hope to have it emailed to you by the end of the week, everyone. But in the meantime, if you appreciated this, if you appreciated our work here at Educate Us, I would just ask you to go to educateusaction.org and click the donate button. Even if you give us $5, we provide all of these events to you for free. And because we want everyone to have access to this information, it's so important, but the work we do is not free. So if this is of value to you, we would ask you can kick in literally $5, $10, every little bit helps. And we really appreciate everyone here for coming. We hope to see you in August for kind of a town hall on what we've learned from the Trump administration about how they plan to undermine sex education and how we can fight back. Yeah, we'll see you all soon. We really appreciate everybody. Thanks.